Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. If I could get your attention. I'm Leslie Kaufman. I'm a reporter with Bloomberg Green. I'm so happy to have everyone in this room, and we also have a big crowd at home. We're starting a little late because it turns out we're a packed event, so welcome to the hottest lunch at Bloomberg Green. So I'm very excited to be leading this panel on sustainable forests, and we have a great panel, which I'm going to introduce to you soon. But before we get started, we're going to have some remarks today by the president of the Paper and Packaging Board, our sponsor, Mary Anne Hansan.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Please keep eating, and I'm glad you could join us for lunch. My name is Mary Anne Hansan, and I lead the Paper and Packaging Board. We're an industry promotion program funded by 46 manufacturers and importers of paper and paper-based packaging, and we are overseen by the USDA. Our organization is charged with telling consumers, customers, thought leaders, and influencers like yourselves that about the paper industry's sustainability story. That means both the focus on end of life, recyclability, compostability, biodegradability, and the beginning of life in America's responsibly managed and cared for forests. That's right. In a world of worry about global deforestation, American forests are a bright spot. And paper manufacturers work in partnership with forest landowners, most of them private citizens and families, who together grow twice the volume of forests as we harvest each year. We know from research that the renewability of forests is one of the reasons consumers feel good about using everything from writing journals to e-commerce delivery boxes. But though most Americans seem to understand this simple fact, it proves surprisingly counterintuitive to some. How can an industry that relies on harvesting trees to make products that have a deep and abiding interest in planting trees? It's one of the reasons we think events like this lunch are so valuable. One of the most important questions being asked at this summit is how can leaders and policymakers motivate and incentivize business to make more sustainable decisions? Well, for the paper industry, the incentives couldn't be any clearer. The motivations couldn't be any simpler. If we don't have sustainable forests, we don't have a product or a business model to provide consumers and customers with sustainable packaging and paper products. If we don't put more back into the forests than we harvest, working forests are in danger of being converted permanently to other things. I want to thank our hosts at Bloomberg for organizing this panel and bringing together these four very talented women who will, no doubt, enlighten us about how sustainability and business can work hand in hand. Thank you for coming.
Thank you all, and thank you, Mary Anne. Before we get going, I just want to say that at the end, we will be taking questions. You'll raise your hand, and someone will come around with a microphone, and you can ask the question. So we will save some time. Oh, thank goodness. Now, let me introduce our very talented panelists. The first person is Rita Hite, who's the president and CEO of the American Forest Foundation. That's a national conservation organization, and they work with some of the small landowners that, in fact, own most of the forests in the United States. The next person I want to invite to the stage is Ellen Jackowski. She's the Chief Impact Officer and the head of Sustainable Impact of HP. I think the thing to know here is that HP has pledged zero deforestation for its own paper and packaging lines, and it has expanded an $80 million partnership with the World Wildlife Federation to restore and protect 1 million acres of forest. And the last person to our stage is Tensie Whelan. She's the director of the Center for Sustainable Business at NYU Stern School. And she once served as the executive director of the Rainforest Alliance. So these are women who know a lot about forests. I'm going to take my seat. I think, ladies, as we start, we have to have a few facts about the sadness about the state of our forests globally. Everyone can agree that trees are a good thing. Even Donald Trump, who wasn't much on climate change, was all for planting trees. And I think we all know that forests perform incredible services. They not only take carbon out of the air, they clean water, they provide life or biodiversity, but as a planet, we're not doing a great job of protecting them. If you look at the Amazon alone, we lost 5,000 square miles this past year. That's something the size of Connecticut. But even here in the United States, where we think we're doing a pretty good job, according to estimates like a Global Forest Watch, we've lost 15% of our tree cover in the last 2 decades. So we're not really saving trees here. So I think all of us should answer this question. We'll just start off with is, why is it so hard to save forests? We can all agree it's a good thing. Are there any things that we don't see or don't know, or why is it so hard? Rita, do you want to start?
Sure, I'm happy to start and really appreciate the question. Good afternoon, everyone. So a little bit about the picture of forests in the U.S. To your point, we are losing forests in the U.S. We're losing forests largely to urban development and sprawl. And so when we ask ourselves the question, what do we need to do to help keep our forests as forests and actually have the healthy forests that we need in this country for all those great things, we have to think about who owns those forests. Who owns those forests, and how do we help engage them and motivate them in keeping their forests as forests? And 40% of America's forests, a little known fact, 40% of America's forests are owned by families and individuals. People like you and me, my mom, your neighbor. And these folks want to keep their forests as forests. They want to protect the environment. They want to do the right thing. And oftentimes, they lack the technical and financial resources. And so, to your question, what do we need to do more? What do we need to really pay attention to as we try to keep forests as forests and have those healthy conditions in our forests? One of the key priorities we see is helping these families manage their land, helping them bring resources through markets and through other revenue streams. Forest products markets can be a key way to help support landowners in their economics to keep their forests as forests and invest in their stewardship.
Ellen, do you have thoughts either in the United States or globally?
Sure, and again, happy to be here today to have this important discussion. I think another issue that we all need to recognize is the unsustainable forestry practices that are happening and illegal logging as well. So that is a clear threat to the degradation of forest ecosystems. And when you step back and think about the power of forests, they are an incredible regenerative source of material for all of us. And the fact that nature has already created something that can regenerate so speedily, it's really important for us to really think about how we ensure that process is happening, that we use forests in a way that is always sustainable and always regenerative.
So to add, and again, also great to be here. Thanks, Leslie. I think overall, when you look globally, the biggest challenge around deforestation is conversion of forests into commodity crops like palm oil and soy, which also, interesting enough, we have millions and millions of acres of degraded land on which you could grow those things instead. So we have options, right, even if we want to continue to growing those crops. In the United States, we also have challenges, you mentioned, with sort of conversion to real estate. When the forest products sector to a certain extent, moved out of Maine, we didn't see lots of deforestation. We actually saw, second homes being built there. So that is a real challenge. As we think about this, and I would also say other challenges that we see are, like in Brazil, we're seeing the road building resulting in massive deforestation. We see illegal drugs in Mexico and Central America actually resulting in significant deforestation, and local people trying to protect it actually being killed by the drug runners. So this stuff is actually life and death in many parts of the world. Fortunately not here, but in many other places it is. So I think that there's a lot we can do, and we'll discuss this, to figure out how to ensure that communities can continue to protect their forests, and part of that is making a sustainable way forward with our forests.
So there are several solutions that corporate America and others have used to tackle and to participate in saving forests. I'm going to talk first. I think we'll get to paper products and things like that next, but I'd like to talk first about what has become a very popular thing, which is the carbon offset. Bloomberg, at Bloomberg Green, we've been fairly skeptical about the carbon offset, and we have some pretty good examples. We had an investigative piece on the Nature Conservancy, basically arguing people were being paid, we have several, to do what they were already going to do, which was to save forests. And then we have a second article which looked at Disney, which is spending millions and millions of dollars to preserve parts of the Amazon rainforest, but it didn't do it in conjunction with the people there. And really, it did it because it wanted to offset the very biggest new boat that it wants to do. So what we need to talk about is, are offsets a lie? Can they be done well? If they can be done well, how can they be done so that we're not just getting people to do what they were already going to do, or to allow them to actually add carbon? So let's go in the opposite direction this time. Tensie, why don't we start with you?
Great. Well, so the first thing I want to say about is offsets. Before a company buys offsets, no matter what kind of company, they need to reduce their energy use and find alternatives in terms of renewable energy, then go to offsets. Ultimately, they should be out of the offset business. But I do believe there's an important role for offsets after you've done that. There are a couple of different ways you can think about offsets or insets, which we'll talk about later. But one is offsets that avoid deforestation, for example. So paying people not to cut down trees. Another is paying people to sequester carbon through restoring a degraded landscape. So planting trees or regenerative agriculture techniques, for example. It actually is important to help people from stopping cutting down trees in problematic ways, massive deforestation and so on. But the real issue there is that you're not really having a net zero, as claimed, impact. And also, you have to determine additionality. Would they not have cut down those trees anyway? Right? If you're paying someone to do something that they wouldn't have done, then you're getting into a greenwashing situation. On the other hand, if you are paying people to A, support the management of their forests in a way that is sustainable to ensure long-term carbon sequestration, or paying them to restore degraded landscapes with reforestation or agroforestry, I think you provide a really important source of income for people to help them protect this important resource.
So, Ellen, how do we do this right? Everyone agrees that maybe we need to do it, but how do we do it the right way?
Sure. Well, first I want to go back to Tansie's initial point about the absolute carbon reduction. That has to be your first priority as a company, as an individual, as a way to approach climate change and the problem that we have. And so, for example, at HP, we've set a goal to be net zero by 2040, but our interim goal is by 2030 to have 50% absolute reductions in our carbon footprint across our entire value chain. And again, that 50% absolute reduction has to happen without offsets. So I think staying very focused on that as the primary action, your first attack plan, that needs to stay in focus. But then, of course, offsets do present some opportunities. For us, you mentioned, Leslie, in the introduction, that we've partnered with World Wildlife Fund, also with Conservation International. And we've picked those groups, as well as Arbor Day, because they have credible programs that are holistic. They're involving the communities, they're involving clear science, which it is based in, and then as well thinking about the biodiversity aspects of the work as well. So for us, it's really important, who are you picking to partner with? Are they credible? Is the work auditable? Are you actually seeing the impact that you promised, the world when you made these partnerships? And for us, that's really important.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm happy to jump in here as well. And I think the bigger picture context I just want to make sure we all have too is today forests capture and store anywhere between 13 and 15% of our annual emissions in the US. And that, by the way, that's forest and forest products. And there's research out there by a number of entities that says we can double that. We can double forest power. In the US alone, we can double forest power as a carbon capture and storage technology. That's a pretty awesome thing. And to your all's point, we believe at AFF that you have to have every solution in the toolbox, and corporations need to do everything they can to reduce their emissions through their technology, through their energy use, et cetera, before they get to an offset conversation, before they get to a carbon credit conversation. So that's one of the things that we're pursuing at AFF is we don't work with corporations that haven't done everything they possibly can within their own control to reduce their emissions. Now, to this question around integrity and credibility.
Right, because you work with the families.
Yeah, absolutely. So we think about integrity and credibility in the carbon markets in two ways. One, we think about in the context of the buyers have to have integrity and credibility. They have to do everything they can within their own control, and they have to ensure, to your point, Ellen, that they're buying credits from credible sources. So global standards and using credits that are verified by global standards, really vetting the projects that you're pursuing and looking at. So that's one thing on the kind of buyer side. On the carbon project developer side, which the American Forest Foundation is partnering with the Nature Conservancy to build a new program. It's called the Family Forest Carbon Program, and it's all about how do we tap the power of America's family forests. Huge potential, 40% of our forests. Again, how do we tap the power? But we have to do it in a way that has an impact on the atmosphere. It cannot be a solution that doesn't have an impact on the atmosphere. And to this issue around additionality, innovation is needed there, because we cannot be affording to pay for folks that, again, would have done it already, or something that was already happening on the land stakes. So what AFF has done in partnership with the Nature Conservancy is really try to isolate that and bring a new innovation to the table where we're not measuring intent of landowners anymore. We're measuring action. So the way our program works and the innovation we've built into it is we measure what the additional carbon is on the land that's enrolled in our program, and what's the additional carbon on the land that's not in our program. And we're measuring the action, the difference between the two. And if there is no difference, if what is happening on the enrolled land is the same thing that's happening on the unenrolled land, there's no carbon additionality, and there's no credit associated with that. So that innovation is key.
So you would measure one person's family forest against another person's family forest, one that was in the program and one that wasn't.
Exactly.
And in other words, one might see trees cut down, but the one that was in your program wouldn't, and that way you'd have some sort of measure.
Exactly. That's again, this is an innovation in the forest carbon credit space, where right now, what a lot of the methodologies do is they just project out. To y'all's point, they project out intention, and they say, okay, that landowner, that they probably weren't going to harvest, so we're going to assume that in what we get credit for. We're taking that intention out of the equation and saying, let's measure the action. Let's measure, did this practice on this forest that's in the program actually result in added value compared to one that's not? And if there is no benefit, there is no carbon credit.
Okay, I have a follow-up question on
Yeah.
that, which has to do with the new and innovative ways to do this, but I just want to make sure, because we have time here, to talk about paper products and using the forest as a crop, essentially, as opposed to a biodiverse living organism, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, a lot of these programs we're seeing are trees, but they're not forests, right? So I want to talk about where you stand on the best way to move forward with protecting trees. Does it have to include paper and products? And if so, can it do it in a way that isn't actually harmful for biodiversity and really is better for the land? We can start at that end and move this way.
So, short answer, yes. There is a way, and in fact, again, with the family landowner population, what we find is markets for forest products, as well as markets for carbon and all sorts of other biodiversity, all these other values that our forests are providing, are a key revenue stream that help those families pay the taxes, maintain their roads, and invest in the stewardship that they want to do on their land, whether it's habitat restoration, invasive species control. Those markets are essential revenue streams for those families. And we actually did a study in the South a few years ago, talking with Southern family landowners and landowners that were harvesting versus landowners that weren't. And what we found is the landowners that were harvesting were actually doing more for biodiversity protection. They were doing more habitat improvement. They were doing more to protect that critical resource because they had the resources to put back in the land. So we see that there are critical opportunities for forest products to become that revenue stream. It's got to be done right. We got to ensure that especially family landowners who are, again, struggling to do this every day have the technical resources and support so that they know how to do the right thing and have that resource available to them.
Ellen, you have thoughts?
Sure, of course. So HP makes printers. Hopefully some of you have them in your homes. And what goes through printers? Of course, paper. So several years ago, we set a goal to ensure that any paper with the HP logo on it, any HP branded paper, was manufactured in accordance with zero deforestation. And that means it's either coming from a certified source like FSC or SFI, or it has recycled content in it. And we've achieved that goal for several years now. So for us, the issue is going beyond the HP branded paper and how do we shift the entire paper industry? Because an interesting fact, of all the paper that goes through HP printers, only about 1% of that paper is HP branded. So we wanted to make sure that we can tell our customers, when you buy an HP printer, whatever kind of paper you're putting through it, you can be assured that we are restoring, protecting, and responsibly managing forests for that amount. So with that, that was the basis for our partnership with World Wildlife Fund to expand it to account for that calculation of the 99% of non-HP branded paper, going well beyond our own carbon footprint, not just Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3, but now out into the other brands of paper that our customers are choosing. So with actions like that, as well as creating what we've called the HP Sustainable Forest Collaborative, where we've invited the largest paper manufacturers like Domtar, Mondi, International Paper, as well as experts like WWF to join to help shift that industry to share the same values and approach and successes that we've had with our own HP branded paper, and how do we then again shift the whole paper industry so that you all can enjoy your HP printer, your printed products, and not have to worry about how that paper is being farmed and harvested, that it is responsible, it is done in a regenerative manner.
Tensie? Yeah, and I just want to say that I did a story when I was at the Times, and then I was amazed that I did the story again when I got to Bloomberg of the NRDC has been tracking people using pristine forest up in Canada to make toilet paper products. So the industry is a long way to go, right?
So what I was going to say is that there's very clear good forestry practices, good sustainable forest management, and then there's problematic forest management. If you look at this country, a good example, Mendocino Redwood bought up land that had been massively degraded by the prior forest company. In doing that, to your point, that they needed the resources actually from the logging, they were able to get rid of some of the trash trees that were there to create and protect important high conservation value areas that will never be deforested. They managed the soil erosion that had been happening with all the soil was destroying the streams and the salmon fishing. They set aside wildlife corridors. Those are the types of things that you do when you have good sustainable forest management, and from that, the income to put back into the forest, as well as to ensure that that forest doesn't get developed for second homes, because that area, for example, would be a high value area for that. We can look at this as well in Latin America. So largest pulp and paper company in the world, one of the largest in the world, Klabin out of Brazil, they have commodity eucalyptus trees and pine that they're sourcing for toilet paper, amongst other things. But what they're also doing is that they've created kind of if you see it from the sky, it's from the from the air, it's beautiful. This quilt, really, where they've created corridors of natural forest, where they're protecting the natural forest, and then they have the pine interwoven in between that, pine and the eucalyptus. And they've actually been training all the local farmers and others around them to protect natural forests, reforest, as well as produce pine and eucalyptus for their own production. And in doing that, they're preserving that biodiversity of the whole area. And in fact, in that area, which is between Sao Paulo and Rio, there's no other forests, all right? You see everything around there has been developed, except for the area where there are forest products, because there is a financial. Now, again, done well, there are plenty of problematic forest operations operating in Brazil and elsewhere. But these are two examples of where you can do this right.
All right, well, I did have more questions, but we're now getting to under 10 minutes, so I did want to give people a chance to ask some questions. If someone has it, you could raise your hand and they'll bring you a microphone. If you'll just, they're going to bring you the microphone. If you could just give your name and your association before you speak.
David Wilcox, Reach Scale. So we overshoot every year, and we have all of the companies making commitments to do less harm. And we can never understand how the commitments to do less harm in any way, shape, or form relate to the fact that we're always overshooting. So the people who are experts on this have proposed something that, unfortunately, not only are the companies against it, but even a lot of the evaluators against it. It's called thresholds and allocations. And until you actually spend your data gathering time on the denominator, you'll never know whether your numerator work is actually getting us where we need to go. So thresholds and allocations forces you to look at the whole thing and figure out, why is it always overshooting? If it's second homes and the second homes are being bought by business executives across the Fortune 500 and you're overshooting because of that, well, you better stop doing that. Well, without thresholds and allocations, you have no way to kind of focus in and see where the actual harm is being done. So should we have thresholds and allocations? Would HP support thresholds and allocations? Would companies get behind actually, because we're going to gather a shitload of data, one way or the other. It's just we're gathering the wrong data.
Yeah.
Ellen, is this something you feel you can handle? I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but maybe you do.
I mean, I think I'll go to your principle. The principle is you need to be measuring, the actual impact, right? And you need to get your data right so that you know, are your programs actually, changing the dial for the globe, for all of us sitting here on the earth. And I think that is incredibly important. And from HP's perspective, we have been reporting on our carbon footprint longer than anyone else in the IT industry. We were the first to publish it. We were the first to set comprehensive carbon reduction goals and then report on that every single year. And each year, our numbers are getting better. And I don't mean better just in the sense of, we're working towards achieving our goals, but the accuracy of the data that we have to measure, the standards with which the industries have come together and science has come together to help shore up, like the data and our processes are getting better. And I can't, overemphasize that enough in terms of how important that is. And we spend a lot of time inside our company and working with the experts to make sure we get the science right, because that's changing and improving every year, and then to get our own actions and impact right in terms of how we are measuring. So agree with, there is still much more work to be done on the data side, and we are in it for the long haul. And each year you will see us improve how we report. We've been doing it now for over 20 years with our annual Sustainable Impact Report.
Are there any other questions? Does anyone else have anything else they want to ask? Yeah, go ahead. Oh.
So thank you so much for this wonderful talk. Very informative as well. Personal opinion, I think that there's a limit to what everyone can do. Now, obviously, you want to reach for the sky and be able to have as much of an impact as possible. But really, where do you draw the line as to where HP's real responsibility is? For sure, you can develop, new branded paper and everything. But if you want to actually build a clean power plant, you're printing out 14,000 pages of paper to be able to build that plant, when you go see the regulator. So sometimes, that you can make that process electronic, but at the end of the day, there's so many things that you cannot control. So for example, even for the printers, there are certain materials that you're going to have to use, like certain plastics, and the same approach applies to even the factories that are producing all these materials, and that falls more within their balance sheets. Than yours, frankly. If you try to go and do the tour of all the facilities manufacturing this equipment in a purely zero carbon manner, it's going to be very difficult, and in fact, the progress is slower in those realms of manufacturing. So really, how do you create that separation in terms of this is really what we're responsible for? And maybe that helps with avoiding the overshooting, because it's true, there are certain things that you cannot control, right? So for example, if you're operating in New York, we shut down a nuclear power plant, added 2 new natural gas plants, uprated a 3rd natural gas plant, you did not control the closure of that nuclear power plant, right? So where is the limit of that responsibility?
Thank you. And did you want to, yeah, go ahead.
Tensie?
Yeah, Tensie wants to.
So, I think there's obviously a need for public policy. That also goes to the thresholds question too. We need to understand where we all want to go together, and we need more engagement by government to help us get there. But at a specific corporate level, what a corporate does is understand what are the most material, environmental, and social issues for them to focus on, where they have the most impact, what has the most impact on them, and then how they can set targets that are tied to, in this case, net zero goals, but in other cases, other types of goals, and then innovate around that. And there's a lot that can be done. So I'll just give you an example, since we're in forest products, of a company called Domtar, big pulp and paper company. Forest products company. And so they started with ensuring that they had FSC certification and sustainable forest management on all of their product. That's the first place. You got to make sure that you're protecting the biodiversity, the soil, the forest, et cetera. Secondly, they looked at specific issues like caribou management and sort of tackled those with World Wildlife Fund and others. Third, they looked at things like, their diapers, right? When you manufacture them, you cut out the holes in the diapers, and that's a lot of waste. So they came up with a new process to get rid of those holes. Then they looked at the fact that they were in the trucks, and the diapers are so light, they take up a lot of volume in the trucks to transport them. Then there you have a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. They figured out how to reduce the volume of the diapers by a third. Then they looked at the water that they use. They said in the Southeast, water's free. Why do we worry about water? They looked at the full analysis, found out that due to the amount of energy moving around that water and processing that water, that free water was costing them $1.5 million per mill to use that quote-unquote free water. So then they started to tackle that. My point in all of this is that you need to understand these material issues, and there's a hell of a lot that you can do as a company to both manage for those and improve your bottom line as a result of investing that. And Domtar has a competitive advantage with customers when they're selling these to customers who have to worry about their supply chain and the greenhouse gas emissions in their supply chain and the water, embedded water in their supply chain because of these types of actions they make. So I would sort of say that there's a lot that can be done.
Okay, terrific. We now are under 2 minutes. I saw that there was one other, did you want to?
It's okay, just crunch on time and stuff.
Okay, we have time for one more question, if you want to stand up.
Okay, I'll just speak loudly. Thank you. So this is something I've been thinking about, and then I had no idea it was 40% that was owned by just regular families. Should there be some sort of responsibility by buying what's like actually should be available to everyone, which is land? Maybe should there be some sort of like program to go through to be certified to I'm actually now have a rights to own land. I know what to do, how to properly take care of it, because I know you're working with them to help them out after they've acquired land. Just something I've been thinking of, if that's a good way to go about educating people better at okay, you're actually taking on a responsibility here, buying land. So maybe after a certain amount of acres, okay, if you want to buy land, you have to also go through this program first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really good question. So a couple of things I would say. A number of forest owners inherit their land, right? So it's people who a lot of them don't even realize that they're inheriting land, right? So there's a whole issue around that. There are a lot of voluntary programs and even tax programs in states that if you, for example, own land and you want to get the forest tax benefit, right, for managing that land as a forest versus, a real estate development, et cetera, you have to subscribe to certain sustainability practices. So there's a lot of voluntary programs out there right now. Again, what we find is most landowners are hungry for that, right? They want to do that. And often it's about resources availability. Foresters. Do we even have enough foresters to work with these landowners out there? And how do we actually pay for that, right? How do we sustain that? And that's the promise that we see in things like carbon markets, forest products markets, et cetera, is a way to actually finance that proactive work that a landowner is really hungry for.
So I want to thank everyone. I mean, I think it's been a very substantive discussion, and obviously we could keep going, but I want to keep it roughly to our time frame. We started late. So first of all, I want to thank our panelists. All of you were fabulous and very informative. I want to thank all of you and everyone at home. I hope you'll join us for the rest of the Bloomberg Green Summit, which will be ongoing for the rest of the afternoon. And thank you for coming.